What you don't understand about the 5 stages of interviewing is likely causing you to prepare in the incorrect way and possibly even costing you the job. There's a core concept in psychology called Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and it is a basic framework for understanding how we as humans and why we as humans act the way we do. The core principle of Maslow's hierarchy of needs are that there are 5 steps to how we as humans behave, and the motivations for each thing decrease as our needs are met. The core tenet of Maslow's hierarchy of needs is that we have base level psychological needs that are rooted in sufficiency. We must meet these before we can move on to kind of more growth oriented needs. From bottom to top, these needs, as they are met, are psychological, safety, loving and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Again, and it's only as we meet these needs that we can focus on the higher order needs, which are more rooted in our need to grow as people versus just surviving. One of the things that I do really, really well is pattern match. And in this case, having done as many hundreds of these interviews that I've done with candidates like yourself, what I've discovered is that there's a similar set of needs in the job candidate space. If you don't know or understand what these steps, these needs are for you as the candidate, you may get stuck at one of the levels because of failure to plan or running out of time ahead of your interview. The first step in the candidate hierarchy of needs is just a resume update. And this usually happens because you're dissatisfied with your job, or you hear from a friend, colleague, whatever, about a new job that might sound more interesting to you. And you can't go on to the next phase until you've updated your resume and even put your hat in the ring for that job. Assuming you've met that need, you've sent your resume off, you are now in the pool. And if you get the call that says, we want to interview you, you are now in panic mode because what are you going to do to prepare for your interview? The most common step I see of those who are really completely unprepared for the interview process is the resume review. They'll just go through their resume that they sent out. They literally just updated, so they feel like they should know it and have all their stories. They read through their resumes as if this is the way to prepare to talk about the myriad of topics that are likely to come up in whatever job interview you have. The reason why this isn't sufficient is because the questions you're going to get are going to focus on various core competencies or leadership principles that the company is looking to fill in the role that they're trying to fill. And if you just come in to talk off the cuff about your resume, unless you are the most gifted storyteller on the planet, this is likely to be doomed to failure. If you've been around the block enough, if you've interviewed enough, or have interviewed other candidates for specifically knowledge work type jobs, this is where you see most of these behavioral interview questions being asked. And what I mean by behavioral interview questions, they usually start with, tell me about a time when, right? Tell me about a time you've been unsatisfied with the status quo. Tell me about a time you had to take difficult customer feedback and turn it into a new feature, or tell me about a time you were able to see around a corner and deliver a customer something they didn't know they needed or wanted. The way that my customers have described this stage to me is they're literally staring at their resume, and they'll say to me, I don't have any stories to tell. I don't know what stories to tell, which is not really true. You're staring at your resume. Start there. That's where your stories are. Now, you're going to have many other stories from your work career, but when you're at this stage and you're in panic mode and you're like, I have no stories to develop, I have no idea what to do, it's because what you're thinking of as a story is some canonical thing, which is not really defined. And so since you don't know what target you're trying to hit, you have no idea how to hit it. Story development really comes down to having a format, a linear storytelling format. And the most common one is the STAR format, right? Situation, task, action, result. And this is where people start panicking about their stories. How do I take something that happened to me and turn it into a situation, a task, an action, and a result? This is where they get stuck. The next level on this candidate hierarchy of needs is speech writing. This is where you figured out that you need to get your stories in order and you kind of have a sense as to how you're going to go about this. And so what do you do? And I guarantee you, this is usually the final kind of big boss that people hit and they think once they clear it, they're fine. And this is a very cumbersome process that I did, many of my colleagues have done, many of the candidates who come to me at interview they have, most of the people who now get to the point where they say, I need a mock interview, they've done this. I guarantee you this is going to resonate. They write speeches. They imagine questions they might get, and then they write long answers. And they do that a lot for, 12 to 15 stories. So now you have a, call it 30 to 40 page document that you think you're going to memorize ahead of your interviews. I've covered the problem with speech writing in other interviews. I'll have a link to it at the end. But the biggest challenge is that you're not going to use any of this content because you're not actually going to memorize it. And the likelihood that you've got the Venn diagram of questions asked and questions prepared for, it's going to be pretty thin overlap. But ultimately, the biggest failure of this level is that when you're speech writing, you're writing the way you write You're not writing to tell a story. That's one problem, but you're also not writing the way you talk. And so when you try to read it back or even to memorize it, the word tuples and the combinations that you've used, they'll stumble out of your mouth and you can't memorize it because it's not the way that you communicate. And the core message I want to leave with you is that an interview is meant to determine the answer to the question of the interview is, can this person do this role at this company and likely exceed expectations? That's what we're trying to answer. And to do that, you have to show up as your authentic self. Because the question that the interviewer is asking is, how does this person work? And can they work here? Right? That's what they're trying to assess based on how you communicate. So this isn't really going to work because the way you write is not the way you speak. The way we communicate at work is much shorter sentences. We don't write these long prose and try to sound erudite and crazy smart and blah, blah, blah. None of that is the way we communicate, and that's not how it works. Which brings us to the real final boss, right? This is phase 2 of the big boss battle in how you can prepare and do so in a much more efficient way for your interviews. The name I've given to this step or stage is the methodology I used when I left Amazon. And when I discovered this, I thought I was a caveman discovering fire amongst a civilization of an industrialized set of countries, and they've all discovered fire and beyond. But it turns out the more I've shared this with people, the less common it has become. So either I'm really, really bright and discovered something new, or I'm a moron and I'm peddling nonsense. I don't think it's the second thing. And here's why. Because every time I share it with people and they prepare this way, they share a few things. 1, their stories are much better. 2, their stress levels go way down. And 3, they feel like they're showing up as their authentic selves in their interviews because they can communicate the way they normally communicate, and they're not fumbling through their mind trying to recall a memorized speech. That's not what's going on. What's going on is they are talking about what they did and why and how, and facilitating a conversation between them and the interviewer so that they can determine, can we work together? So again, at the end of the video, I'll have a link to the entire playlist with my StarFact methodology, but I wanted to kind of build out this framework to help people understand where they are in their candidate journey, where they are in their candidate hierarchy of needs. Because as you progress forward, your stress levels will go down because your base levels are met. And when you're just updating your resume and you're in full panic mode while you even qualify for the job, yeah, high stress. Resume's in, now you got the job offer, high stress because you got to develop the stories. But now you start writing your stories and you write out a big doc. That comfort blanket of a 30-page document, it feels real good right up until the moment you need to recall content from it when you're sitting in the interview and you realize, oh, I don't have this memorized. I'm in trouble. Or you get through a couple of interviews and you realize, well, okay, when are they going to ask me a question I prepared for? Because that's not how interviews work right now. I'm aiming to fix that, but that's a different discussion for another time. But when you get all the way to the top of the pyramid and you prepare using the StarFact method and your stories align to leadership principles and not necessarily to imagined questions, and you're prepared to talk about the things that are likely important for your role, your stress levels will go down. Your preparation will be so much better, and you will show up as your authentic self in that job interview and likely land the job that you're seeking.